Hello, everybody. It is Sunday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, Assistant Sports Editor for Multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for our weekly Steelers Mock Draft Tracker video by Brian Batko, our Steelers insider. This is the video where we go through picks we're seeing for the Steelers from around the internet. We debate their worthiness and debate their likelihood. So if you haven't stopped by before, we hope you enjoy that. Brian, how are you this week?
Doing all right, Adam. How are you?
It's getting to be the dog days, Brian, of these mock drafts where you're seeing the same names over and over. I think last season you saw a little bit more variety at this stage.
There were like 10 tackles too that were all kind of high to late first round candidates. So I mean, there was just a diverse array of simply offensive line prospects last year, and yeah, not quite the same this year so far.
Well, and the Steelers had a second round pick, which made it a little bit easier to talk through, those first and second round scenarios that as of present we can't do right now. But we're going to go through.
Are we going to do the thing with DK Metcalf that we did with Minkah Fitzpatrick and say DK Metcalf is their second round pick in the 2025 draft? Remember how everyone's like, oh, the Steelers didn't have a 2020 first round pick. Minkah Fitzpatrick was their first round pick. So I guess we could do that for, the next 20 years with DK Metcalf.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. But yeah, I'm excited to dig into some of these names. They're a little bit familiar, but I think we can find some different angles to talk about them. Before we get into all of that, just want to thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's Mike's Beer Bar. Meet us at Mike's on the North Shore for the ultimate sports experience. With over 20 TVs, you won't miss any of the action. Pirates games, Riverhounds and Premier League matches, college and pro football, hockey, and every major sporting event. Plus, don't miss the Post-Gazette's NFL Draft live stream happening Thursday, April 24th and Friday, April 25th, live from Mike's Beer Bar. Enjoy 300 local beers, 80 local taps, and incredible food like their famous steak on a stone. When you need your sports fix, and especially for the NFL Draft, tell your friends to meet me at Mike's. Brian, the first name I wanted to bring up this week was Derrick Harmon. We've been talking a lot about him the last couple of weeks. Since that need was filled at receiver by DK Metcalf. Yeah. Before that, it was honestly mostly receivers that you were seeing. Matthew Golden and Emeka Egbuka, Luther Burden III was mixing in there. A lot less of those picks now, a lot more Derrick Harmon. I believe Mel Kiper Jr. led that charge this week, but I think I saw 3 or 4 mocks with him as the guy. He seems to be kind of emerging, as we talked about Egbuka, as that consensus guy. Going into free agency, it seems like Harmon is becoming the consensus guy coming out of it so far.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. You watch him at Oregon last year, and it's kind of like watching Cam Hayward, but rushing from the left side of the defense and instead of the right side. I mean, very similar body types, good motor, that kind of thing. And it seems weird to say still with Oregon, but both coming from the Big Ten. We know the Steelers like that conference traditionally, and I don't think they'll hold any grudges against the Oregons and UCLAs and USCs of the world. Although I do think it's a little different calculation for them with like quarterbacks. They always want to see how those guys can throw the ball in the elements in adverse weather conditions. But for D linemen, that not so much a factor. So yeah, I mean, Harmon is he's kind of the platonic ideal of taking the baton from Cam Hayward and being the bridge to the next generation of Steelers, at least on paper. And I think the sort of latest development, if you want to call it that, with him, Adam, is I don't think the Steelers sent any of the heavy hitters to his pro day. Now, simply by logistics, Pittsburgh to Eugene, not an easy trek to make. So it might not have as much to do with their interest level in him or lack thereof versus just from a practical standpoint, sticking to their usual pro day circuit. And we know last year the previous precedent was sort of broken when they took Troy Fautanu out of, again, another Pacific Northwest college without sending the top brass out to his pro day. Because if you're a real draft sicko, and if you're watching this video, I assume you are, you know that there's a long-standing tradition, almost looking like it was becoming a requirement, of the Steelers having their head coach and GM at their first round picks pro day. Maybe it'll be 2 in a row now that those two things just don't line up.
Do you think there's any world, though, where if he doesn't come in for a visit that he ends up being the first round pick? Or do you think that will be the signal that, yeah, he's on the radar and a possibility? Because if he had neither one of those, it would be kind of strange for them to just kind of go blind with him. I mean, there's plenty of tape out there, but they wouldn't have, necessarily had on him what they've had on others in the past.
It would, but I wouldn't rule it out because I'm sure they met with him to some extent in Indianapolis. Obviously, they had the Senior Bowl opportunity as well. So, it's one of those deals where I still think that they could make that happen, regardless of if he's in here for a visit. But I would still expect that to be the case, just because the guys that they have less exposure to and the guys that they are considering the most, that they tend to have them in the South Side for a day to get the lay of the land, get to know them a little better. And we'll see. They've only got about 24 or 25 of those visits filled in so far, and they get 30 of them to play with.
What's your read on Harmon versus Kenneth Grant? I saw a couple picks for Grant this week, but there's more for Harmon out there. Why do you think that there is, a little bit more momentum going toward Derrick Harmon? Is it because Kenneth Grant has, you do sometimes see him in the top 15, or at least in that 15 to 20 range. Is it just a matter of he's not available in a lot of mock drafts for the Steelers at number 21? Or do you think that there's a football purpose where you might prefer Derrick Harmon to Grant?
Real quick before we get on that, I misspoke. Harmon wasn't at the Senior Bowl. I was thinking of the other Oregon guy, I think Jordan Birch, the other defensive lineman that was with them. And he's also kind of a sneaky, potential for the Steelers at some point in the draft, I think. So, we'll see where they go with them. But yeah, as far as Grant versus Harmon, different types of players. Harmon, more of your 5 technique, like I said, potentially the next Cam Hayward. Whereas Grant, I imagine he'd come in here and be a 2-gapping guy. And then you've got to, bump Keanu Benton down the line a little bit, which I think he could do. I think the nice thing about Benton is, depending on who you draft, he can either stay as like a traditional nose tackle, or he can work more as a quote unquote, defensive end in the base defense. So yeah, I think both of those two guys are very much central casting Steelers, just in slightly different ways. And yeah, from everything I see, Adam, Grant much more likely to be the one that gets pushed high up the board because of the comparisons to Dexter Lawrence, the juice that he brings coming from Michigan. And Harmon, maybe just looked as a slightly lesser prospect, but the Steelers, they need big people up there for these AFC North battles. So they both fit the bill for sure.
We've seen, get into some other names here, Brian, a ton of Omarion Hampton picks. And I've never quite understood why he seems to be solidifying as, I'd say he's probably in the top 5 names I see most frequently at this point. Is this something of a Saquon Barkley effect where, it feels like the running back position has been devalued by a lot of people for a lot of years at this point? That same conversation swirled when the Steelers ended up taking Najee Harris. I think I've been proceeding as if that is the world that we still live in, but you're seeing more running back picks overall in the first round. Ashton Genty expected to go higher and higher, it seems. I know Omarion Hampton keeps coming up for the Steelers because of the absence of Najee Harris now in that running backs room. So what's your read on why Hampton seems so sticky? Are you taking him seriously as a prospect for that reason?
I think he's appearing a lot because he's pretty close to a consensus number 2 running back in this class. And someone putting together a mock draft looks at the Steelers depth chart, sees Jaylen Warren, Kenneth Gainwell, Cordero Patterson, is like, okay, these guys need an upgrade there for sure. And it's conventional wisdom. I think you can be a casual observer of the Steelers and know that they want to ground and pound, have a run first identity as an offense and as a football team, and provide, add to that Arthur Smith being the offensive coordinator. So I think that's why you will see that. But as much as I like Hampton, I don't think I like him as a first rounder. I think Ashton Genty is the only real potential Saquon Barkley type. I'm not saying he's going to be the next Saquon, but that kind of needle mover out of the backfield with his game-changing, game-breaking ability. So, Hampton is to me, it would be a very similar pick to Najee Harris. He might be a little quicker. He might have a little better long speed, but it's always tough to project that to the NFL level. When you do deal with players who are a lot of times just bigger and faster than their college opponents. And Hampton didn't have quite the supporting cast around him that Najee had in Tuscaloosa, but I think the ACC level of competition was also a little bit less than Najee faced at Bama and the SEC. So, Hampton, I think he's going to be a good player in the NFL, but the second round would be the sweet spot to me for him. And as we mentioned at the top, Steelers don't have a second round pick. If he were there in the third, I'd probably run the card up, but that doesn't seem too likely. I'll say this, though, about Hampton, Adam. I mean, Maurice Jones-Drew came out with his running back rankings this week for NFL Network, and he had Hampton 7th, and he was getting crushed in the social media comments. But maybe it's a short running back bias against big running back, but he had some surprising names listed ahead of him.
Well, I mean, Maurice Jones-Drew did do the job, which makes him different than a lot of these people putting the mock drafts together. So that's something that certainly makes you pay attention.
Then fans will say, "Hey, but is he watching as much film as some of these mock draft analysts?" Yeah, that's always kind of the funny thing. And maybe he is. I don't know, but then you get debates where people are like, "Hey, obviously you haven't watched enough tape if you've got Omarion Hampton 7th among running backs." So I guess we'll see who's right at the end of the day.
Yeah, whether he might be in that first round range like we're talking about, or whether he could be a guy that could follow the Steelers later in the draft, or if they're able to deal back into the second round somehow. Brian, another name that has been sticky even after the Steelers signed Darius Slay to the cornerbacks room. Generally, I've seen fewer corners in the last couple of weeks in these mock drafts, but the name that does keep coming up at corner is Jahdae Barron. From Texas. He's played outside, he's played inside, he's pretty versatile. We've talked about him on this podcast before. Is the versatility the reason that he's sticking? Because the Steelers theoretically have a need potentially for another young corner if things don't work out with Corey Trice, especially. But potentially even if they do work out with Darius Slay, they do work out with Corey Trice, you could still potentially have a need for a Mike Hilton type inside, someone who can be a difference maker for you.
Well, before I get to Barrett, I'll just say on the running backs again real quick. The guys that MJD has above Hampton are Genty at 1, of course, but then Travion Henderson from Ohio State, Cam Scatterbo from Arizona State, Quinshon Judkins from the Buckeyes, DJ Giddens from Kansas State, and RJ Harvey from UCF. So some names that certainly don't get as much buzz. But as for Jahdae Barron and potential of a corner in round 1 in general, I'd probably prefer to take a bigger swing on like a Will Johnson from Michigan if he slides. And I just saw that, and I think it was Warren Sharp's mock draft this week. And it seems like his stock is dipping for whatever reason. And that would almost be a pick that you're kind of kicking the can down the road a year with him. He had an injury last season that cut his junior campaign short for the Wolverines. I think it was a turf toe or something foot related for Johnson. But he has a ton of upside. Whereas Barron, I think the value in him in the first round is you're playing him right away. And maybe it's in the slot, maybe it's on the outside, maybe it's even as like a overhang or safety type. And I just don't really see the path to that for him with the Steelers right now because of the free agency moves, not just Darius Slay, but it seems like they like Brandon Echols, bringing him in here as a seasoned vet from the Jets who can play the slot, compete on the outside. And yeah, I still think I know they were high on Corey Trice, at least after they drafted him. I don't know how much the injuries have taken a toll both on him and on the Steelers' desire or confidence in him. But yeah, I think the Steelers' cornerback room has become pretty close to solidified, at least to the point that I wouldn't be as eager to take one of these, ready-made types right away like Barron from Texas.
Yeah, I found it interesting that he's the name that sticks for people, and some of these others that we saw earlier in the process haven't as much. I do still see a Will Johnson every once in a while, I think for the same reason, but I didn't. You found one. I did not find a Will Johnson this week, so interesting to see how his stock is playing out. I also find the Cam Scatterbo above Omarion Hampton interesting. There's some
JD has now that
now that you've rattled off the names, I'm like, listen, I like Cam Scadaboo, was a fun college player to watch. Am I sure that athleticism is going to translate the same way in the pros? I don't know. I like Quinshon Judkins more than Travion Henderson too. The same backfield, we saw them in the same circumstances. I just think he's a bit more of a playmaker than I found Henderson to be. So for him to have Henderson second is also interesting to me.
I think those two guys, like while we're talking about the potential, you're building your offense in the image or in the vision of the Eagles. You get big enough holes, and Judkins, Henderson, I mean, they might be able to get skinny, wiggle through those, and break a big run even more than Hampton, who has got the big body type and is a bruiser. And I'll kind of finish maybe the running back conversation on this, Adam, is you look at the way the room's been constructed, which I did for the Sunday paper, if you got it or you're going to see it online, but I just kind of did a roster reset for the Steelers, position by position, breakdown, nothing too in depth, but a little refresher for fans to kind of look at, all right, this is our running back room right now. This is our receiver room, our D-line room, and so on and so forth. Unless Cordero Patterson is going to be in the mix again at age 34, which I don't think would be a wise way to proceed for the Steelers after what we saw from him in the second half of last season. They are missing that bigger back who can run with more power at the line of scrimmage and, move the pile when you need a yard or two. I think Jaylen Warren can do that, but that's not really the best usage of his skill set. And he's a smaller guy, and we know he runs hard, but I think we saw at times last season that, when the defense is packing the box and you just want to hand the ball to somebody, you need somebody who's got a little bit more heft behind him. So I think that's ultimately the body type that the Steelers will target in the running back that we're all assuming they draft. But it comes down to more a question of, all right, do you need to take that guy in the third round, let alone the first? Maybe you can get someone like that in the fourth or the fifth and still going to be part of the puzzle on offense, but you're just not investing as much draft-wise.
Any quick thoughts on RJ Harvey? You mentioned him earlier as right ahead of Hampton and MJD's rankings. I did see him pop up in a multi-round mock this week as the third-round pick. Any due diligence on him?
A lot of speed. Broke off a ton of long runs at UCF, but he's another smaller guy like Warren and Gainwell are, and so is Cam Scadaboo for that matter. So I think they've kind of cornered the market on the smaller, shiftier backs, and with Gainwell, who, I mean, he ran a 4.44, I believe, coming out of Memphis a few years ago when he got drafted by the Eagles. I mean, I think you've added the long speed element with Gainwell, even if that wasn't necessarily a trait that he got to show last year with Philly, because there aren't many crumbs left by Saquon. So
let's move on to quarterbacks, Brian. The Shedeur Sanders drumbeat just keeps getting a little bit louder every week that he could potentially be dropping out of the top 5. Then the question becomes how far, and if he gets to the teens, could he drop all the way to 21 and be available when the Steelers hit the clock? What's your read on how that situation has developed with him? Do you think he's going to be anywhere close to the conversation for the Steelers where, we're sitting there at, I don't know what it would be, 9:30, 10 o'clock saying he's still there and we got to talk about it?
I don't think so. I think this is a case of, every year the variance of opinions on one or two quarterbacks in the draft are just all over the place. So it's really tough to nail down. But then I think a lot of times the most extreme ends of the spectrum on these guys tend to not happen. Like I'm thinking about Will Levis fourth a couple years ago when people were putting that out there, or even go way back to before I was covering the Steelers, and it was like I remember Nathan Peterman was getting like the late first round buzz, and he went in the fourth or fifth, I think. So, the people on the outside who aren't making decisions for teams sometimes fall in love or out of love with quarterback prospects when really it was Occam's razor type deal all along. It's like, all right, this guy was widely viewed as the second best player at the position and a top 5 pick. It's going to be closer to that than anything else. And I'll just say from a Steelers perspective, Adam, even if they would be, loving to get Shedeur at 21 and thinking, all right, this is our franchise quarterback of the future, how did no one take him? Just the logistics of, making a pick like that. I imagine they went into this pre-draft process like a lot of us, thinking, yeah, there's no way that he's going to be in our range. So you're probably not setting up the same level of get to know type meetings at all the different checkpoints along the way. I mean, I'm sure they've had some semblance of interaction with them, these last couple months or even over the years, but I doubt they've put the same time and effort into a Shedeur Sanders scout to the level of taking him in the first round as you would, looking at guys like Quinn Ewers or Will Howard or Riley Leonard in the middle rounds. So I think that would be a very large departure from the plan, and they would have to be to use a Tomlinism. They'd have to be extremely light on their feet to go down that route, I think.
Yeah, and there's also a reason you're falling to 21. Do the Steelers want to be in that, picking from that same kind of pool again, where, I think a lot of people necessarily didn't see Kenny Pickett as the first rounder that the Steelers ultimately made them. I could see this being a similar situation where if Shedeur's falling, are the Steelers just jumping on him because of the need and because of the name recognition and maybe not following through the way that they should be with all the other needs that they have. Because I think that's the other piece that's different from when you took Kenny Pickett. There's so many other needs that I would rather see them address regardless of who's available, unless it's Cam Ward. I think Cam Ward's my one can't miss in this draft that I would take in an instant if he was there. But I don't know if I feel the same way about Shedeur, and I also don't feel the same way about Jaxson Dart, who has become.
Neither one of them either seem like the style of quarterback that the Steelers have gravitated to over the years. Also, I mean, you can always find exceptions like a Josh Dobbs coming from Tennessee, who was on the smaller side and more of a mobile guy, but he was a fourth rounder. So, I mean, you look at where they've invested high picks at quarterback, Kenny Pickett, first rounder, played in Pittsburgh. So I remember Kevin Colbert talking about how they didn't need to worry about how he'd fare in December and in January, even when people were wondering about the two gloves in the small hands. Mason Rudolph, the big strapping guy who looked like he could be Ben's, little brother physically, at least in those days. And even Landry Jones, who was another kind of sturdier built quarterback. So, I mean, that they've had a type for sure. And I think in this particular draft, it's a lot of the mid to late round prospects who fit that mold better than Shedeur Sanders would. Who's obviously more on the wiry side. And it seems like, I don't know if it's just my algorithm on Twitter covering an AFC North team, but it seems like the links and connections between the Browns and Shedeur are all over the place. And I don't know if that's just Cleveland fans trying to will it into existence. But I mean, it seems like there's more buzz for him being okay with going there than I would have thought this time 4 months ago. And I was like, there's no way Shedeur should go to Cleveland. That's a terrible fit all around.
Yeah, but I've also seen the biggest buzz I've seen is for Jaxson Dart. I think I saw him go as high as number 3 this week, which blew my socks off. Yeah. Our own Joe Starkey's all in on him, calling him the franchise quarterback. Doesn't seem Joe is even entertaining really anyone else other than Jaxson Dart as a possible first-round pick. So why is he so polarizing? Why do we have these people who love him, will put him third in the draft where he hasn't been, through this entire process? And then if there's just as many mocks out there, Brian, where he's not in the first round at all. He's falling at least to the second and maybe further. Because when we started this process, Brian, I was looking at him as like maybe a third round pick.
Yeah.
And now you're seeing just such disparate opinions. And to me, when there's volatility, that usually means that he's a candidate to drop lower than some of the people that love him most are talking about.
Yeah. Again, kind of similar to the Levis situation a couple years ago. And I'm trying to think back if there was anybody like that in last year's draft. But I mean, you go back to Kenny's draft and the whole 2022 class was kind of like that, right? I mean, you'd see Desmond Ridder 10th overall in a mock 1 week. And, we know where he ended up, third or fourth round guy. Malik Willis, same thing. Matt Corral, same
Sam
thing.
Howell.
Sam Howell, sure. It seemed like he lost a little bit of steam throughout the process. But yeah, I mean, Jaxson Dart, I think it's the name. I think it's the name gets people going. It's a great name for a quarterback. The Steelers already have Gainwell at running back, and Thomas Rush is one of their linebackers they signed in the offseason. So maybe they have a thing for the aptly named football players, and especially moving on from Kenny Pickett, and they never wanted Chris Blewett as their kicker. So yeah, but all jokes aside, I think first of all, it's tough to separate player from the system, I think, in a Lane Kiffin offense, because a name I just mentioned, Matt Corral, a couple years ago, kind of had people fooled, hitting wide open guys and operating in that very wide open Kiffin style. So, is Dart a product of that? Is he a much better player? Would he have succeeded anywhere? That's what the evaluators are trying to figure out. We know he transferred from USC and he was doing well there, but not to the point, obviously, that he stayed. So, he's mobile, but I also have seen people questioning. I think Chris Sims was someone who was questioning just how athletic he was, and that maybe even the rushing yards that he put up for the Rebels were more design or just a product of defenses having to back off that explosive passing attack. So yeah, I don't really know what to make of him. Sims also questioned his overall arm strength, and I think if the Steelers are looking down a kaleidoscope future of DK Metcalf and George Pickens catching go balls, then you probably don't want to sacrifice arm strength for just about anything with your potential long-term quarterback.
Yeah, and I think pardon the pun, but to me, he is a dart throw. I mean, he's just the type of guy that, yeah, I can imagine him working out in the NFL and answering some of these questions and, being a very solid quarterback. And I don't know if I'm ready to say franchise quarterback, but I can imagine him having a nice career. I can also imagine him being like those names we just mentioned from that 2022 draft that we talked about so much as potential Steelers if they didn't go with Kenny Pickett, and then most of them have not really been heard from again since. I can imagine
or
that
like
being
a Zach Wilson type, who's also, maybe I'm just making that comparison because they're both from Utah and kind of have the pretty boy sunshine look to them. But speaking of Wilson, we're going to see, I guess, Jaxson Dart at his pro day. Is he going to be one of these next quarterbacks who absolutely lights it up with insane throws and gets people salivating? And sometimes you can put too much stock into that and not enough some of the more nuts and bolts aspects of critiquing a quarterback. So yeah, I mean, Shedeur is probably the most polarizing player in this class, but Jaxson Dart not far behind. And there's always a couple QBs in that realm who send they always they're going to make someone look not very smart, because some people are going to mock them really high, like you said, and some people are going to put them way lower than they ultimately end up in the NFL.
Brian, one other name I wanted to get your thoughts on before we sign off for the week. Alfred Collins was in it. I believe there was a multi-round mock. I saw him go in the third. I think it was CBS Sports mock. Ray Fittipaldo, I think his most recent 7-round mock, he had Alfred Collins going in the second round to the Steelers. Big dude, lot to like about him. If I told you could get him in the third round, how would that influence what you did in the first round?
Well, I think the Steelers will be looking D-line in the third round if they go with one of these more outside the box ideas in the first, whether that is a quarterback or a running back, or if a Tyler Warren would somehow fall to 21, which seems unlikely, but you never know with tight end value in any given year how teams are going to approach that position. So, and even like, could the Steelers really surprise us and try to take an offensive lineman of the future, a guard or something like that, who sits and learns for a year behind Isaac Seumalo, or displaces Mason McCormick and McCormick gets to learn for a year? I mean, these are things that I wouldn't consider particularly likely, but you never know. You can't quite roll it out. It's not like the Steelers share their board with us. So yeah, I mean, corner too, if a Will Johnson or somebody like that is around, then maybe that forces them to kind of go to plan B. And I guess Collins is a decent plan B. I mean, he's got the size that, yeah, I mean, you'd be very intrigued to add that in to your defense on the early downs and hope that helps hem up the Derrick Henrys of the world. So yeah, I mean, he's not one of my favorite D linemen in this draft, but for our big board and stuff at the Post-Gazette, I've paid a lot more attention to the QBs in wideouts than I have the interior guys. I guess I'll, rubber stamp. If Ray Fittipaldo says a big man up front is worth a pick, then I think that big man up front is worth a pick.
Yeah, I like him. I think in that Ray mock, he double dipped, and there were two defensive linemen. So that's why I find it an interesting question of like if you knew you could get this guy, do you still want to double dip? Do you still want to get two guys and have that defensive line more or less built for the future, or does that free you up to take a chance somewhere else? Will be interesting to watch that all play out. Brian, thanks for stopping by this week. Any final thoughts? Anything that we didn't get to that you found interesting in the mock draft world this week?
No, I mean, I guess just on the Alfred Collins front, there are a lot of D linemen like that who I think will be available well into the second night of the draft and possibly even early day 3. Ty Robinson from Nebraska, I like, has a similar body type, not quite as thick as Collins, but he was moving at the combine on the 40. CJ West from Indiana, I think I mentioned him before. He's more of a shorter, stouter guy, but has some interior pass rushing juice. So yeah, I mean, this D-line class kind of reminds me of the running back class. It's pretty deep with a lot of different shapes and sizes, and players that can fit in specific schemes, and you can utilize them as a specialist if need be.
Yeah, so it will be interesting to see how that plays out, or if the Steelers still see a need to maybe deal back into that second round, because there's a lot of guys to like at their positions of need in this draft. Brian, thanks for stopping by. Everyone else, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We got a lot more NFL draft talk, Steelers talk coming your way. As we're recording this on Friday, who knows what's happening with the quarterback situation. If it's not resolved yet, stay tuned for the rest of the week. We'll have more thoughts on that, I'm sure. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. We always appreciate that. And we will talk to you again in the same space next week.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.